bar has come up to me after these tours and said, oh yeah, hay does spontaneously combust under certain circumstances. So that's as good an explanation as any. It comes right from an eyewitness, but it's one of those things we'll never really know for sure what happened unless somebody invents a time machine or something. But Big Jim O'Leary was one of a couple of gambling kingpins named Big Jim who were operating in the city back in those days. We're getting up to an area now about where the biggest gambling parlors would have been. A few generations back, I could have come around here. None of you fine, upstanding people would have been caught alive in this general vicinity. A little bit further back was a neighborhood called Hell's Half Acre. Below Hell's Half Acre was Satan's Mile. Below Satan's Mile, you got into the Levy District where things got really rough. Down there, the bars had names like the Bucket of Blood, the Pervert Hotel, and Bedbug Row. They were about as nice as you'd sound, too. It wasn't just a name. So right in the middle of this, as we get under the bridge, if you look off into the distance, you can see these two large curving buildings. Those are other Bertrand Goldberg designs. It's a senior living apartment complex. But right about in the middle of them would have Big Jim Calissimo's Cafe. The Chicago Tribune once described that as the place in the city where the daughters of shadows dance in the arms of the underworld, while the worshippers call toward their golden idol, jazz. And from every window can be heard the sob of the saxophone, that symbol of lost souls who drift to the port of missing men. Eat your heart out, Leonard Cohen. But in any case, Big Jim Calissimo, who ran that place, was kind of the head of all of the vice lords in the city. If you ran a gamble, Calissimo was your boss. Then 1920 rolled around. 1920 Prohibition started up. Every gangster saw dollar signs in their eyes. They knew there was going to be all the money in the world to be made out here. It was like brewing your own money. But Big Jim had just married one of his chorus girls in the cafe. And he was trying to straighten up and fly right at least a little bit. So he gathered everybody together and said, listen, boys, we are not doing bootleg liquor here in Chicago. We'll still do the gambling parlors and everything, sure, but no bootleg liquor, not here, not on my watch. A couple of days later, he was shot to death in his cafe by an unknown assassin who has never been identified to this day, partly because every single gangster in town had a motive for it. The big rumor at the time was that John Torrio, one of his underlings, had brought in his young apprentice Al Capone to do the shooting for him. Probably wasn't true, but probably helped Capone's reputation a bit. So John Torrio kind of took over everything. He gathered everybody up and said, okay, listen, we are definitely going to be doing bootleg liquor here, but we don't need to be fighting. You take yours, we'll take ours, we'll just divide the city into territories. There will be plenty of money for everybody. That actually worked for a couple of years, too. But the trouble is, these guys who are now just driving beer trucks around were old safe crackers. They were old bank robbers. They were guys who used to blow up the walls of buildings so they could break in and steal stuff. Just driving beer trucks was not exciting enough for them. So pretty soon, Dino Banyan, the head of the North Side, was shot. In retaliation, some of his men came and shot John Torrio. Torrio wasn't killed, but he decided to retire, turn everything over to Al Capone. The rest, as they say, is history. Now right ahead we've got my favorite bridge in the city, the Canal Street Vertical Lift Bridge. Now most of them are like drawbridges. This one, the entire bridge lifts up between these two towers. These two towers that look like something out of Donkey Kong. Can you just picture the gorilla up there rolling barrels down? Now when this first was built 110 years ago, it would go up and down about 90 times a day. I still do see it going up and down every now and then. It's like once every 3 weeks or so I'll be out here on a boat, it'll go up and down. The house up on top is mostly mechanical and electrical stuff on the inside, but there is about 100 square feet of space where the bridge tender used to stay all the time. Now there still is a bridge tender, but they operate about a block away. You just radio ahead. So over on the right here, we're going by Ping Tom Park. This is named after a Chinese-American businessman who helped with the redevelopment of Chinatown in the 70s and 80s. So even in the Capone era, when this was the Levy District, it was gradually starting to turn into Chinatown around here. The 70s and 80s, Ping Tom helped keep it as Chinatown and helped really develop it, partly by developing the new Chinatown Mall. And when he needed an architect for that mall, he brought in Harry Weiss, the same guy who was in charge of the River Cottages and turning that old cold storage building into lofts. Now, Harry Weiss is possibly my favorite of all the architects on the river. He's got more buildings on the river than anybody else. But you can never just look at a building and say, hey, there's a Harry Weiss, because they all look totally different. Say, he would explain this to people as people say, well, Harry, you never really have your own style, do you? He'd say, well, no, I don't like to repeat myself, that's all. That was probably part of it, but also one of his students said, well, the real thing was that Harry just had the attention span of a 6-year-old. And I imagine it was probably a bit of both. He was definitely an eccentric guy. Like, one time he told the Chicago Tribune that he didn't like elevators. He thought they were unnatural. Like, he thought that, the way he described it was, well, when you rise up to heaven, you're lying on your back. So when you rise up in an elevator standing upright, that just strikes me as the most unnatural thing man has yet created. I don't know if he was just winding the reporter up or what, but, you know, we like our architects to be a little bit bizarre. It helps us to remind us of how normal we are. But also, he was a really snarky kind of guy. Like, if you look straight ahead of us here, about the tallest looking building in the skyline ahead is the white one that is behind the red one, the very plain white rectangle. You can kind of tell how long people have been in Chicago based on what they call that one. When they built it in the early 70s, it was the Standard Oil building. People called it Big Stan. Then it became the Amoco building. Then it became the Aon building, and now it's the Aon Center. But when they were first developing it, they brought Harry Weiss in for an interview. And he knew already that they had picked out their architects. They were just interviewing all the other prominent architects because that looked good for investors. It was a total waste of his time, but he took the interview anyway just because it gave him a chance to mess with them a bit. So they sat him down and says, oh, Mr. Weiss, we here at Standard Oil are thinking the building ought to be made out of beautiful, gleaming white marble. What do you say? And Harry Weiss said, well, white marble is one way you could go. I was thinking you should go with black granite. That way it'll match all of your oil spills. So they didn't give him the job, but he knew they weren't going to. He really just took the meeting so he could mess with them a bit. Well, end result is they initially did have it clad in a very thin layer of marble from Carrara, Italy. They made a big deal out of this. The same quarry that Michelangelo used for the marble for the statue of David. Trouble is, a thin veneer of white marble is not going to hold up very well in Chicago winters. They hadn't thought about that part. Within a few years, the marble was already starting to buckle and crack. By the end of the 70s, you see newspaper articles about marble falling off of the building. Before anybody could be hurt, they finally had to take it all down and replace it all with granite. And it cost them more than it had cost them to build the building in the first place. So the moral of the story is always listen to Harry Weiss. And the classic tour guide punchline here is you never take marble for granted. Sorry, I really am. This whole empty space over here is now known as the 72. For a long time we called it Rescoville after the developer Tony Resco. This is mostly old railroad tracks that have been torn up now. They've been gradually talking for years about turning it into an entirely new neighborhood. Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill has just been brought in to turn it into a neighborhood called 72 because it'll be the 72nd neighborhood in Chicago. Now, they're not going to start it for 18 months. It's got approval now, but it's 18 months away. A lot can happen in 18 months. I just never quite believe anything's actually going to happen with this space. Because every 6 months there's a new rendering going around for what somebody's planning for it. So far, nothing has happened yet. I'll believe it when I see it. Okay, now they generally like me to start getting off mic after we pass the Roosevelt Bridge, just as in reference to our neighbors over in River City. But I know that before the end of the tour, I've got to give my pizza recommendation. I know we got people from out of town. Everybody wants to know where to go to get a pizza. Now, it's kind of tricky to ask a local where they go to eat, because you hear all the time, it's like, well, you're from Chicago, where do you go? And the answer is like, you know, Thai place on the corner. It's an Indian place down the block that does a really good butter chicken. But among pizza places, if you look at the guidebooks, you'll see the same basic things. Giordano's, Gino's East, Lou Malnati's, Pequot's comes up now and then. Now, my personal favorite, one that was just in the old neighborhood where I used to live, was a place called OG Trattoria, OGGI, on the 1100 block of West Grand Avenue. Now, it's just a little family-owned place, but it's really fantastic pizza. But while I'm plugging pizza places, I will beg everybody, please don't neglect our thin crust. I mean, our deep dish is great. You gotta try a deep dish, but I would hold up Chicago thin crust over thin crust anywhere else. Like when I work in New York, this kind of gets me in trouble. People ask me, where do I go to get a good slice of pizza? I'll say Chicago. But it's just a different style. New York pizza tends to use less cheese and sauce and emphasize the toppings more. Chicago has a little heartier sauce and a little thicker cheese. Chicago's basically gooey. It's basically gooiness versus greasiness. And I love the New York pizza too, but I'm a gooiness kind of guy myself.
Oh my God.
There's a good slice place here in Chicago called Pie-Eyed Pizzeria in Chicago, Ogden, and Milwaukee. The new one in New York is called Upside Slice at 38th and 8th. Very good, but I'll take Pie-Eyed myself. Now, naturally, I can't show you guys everything I would like to in Chicago just on a river tour, because not everything is right on the river. If you want some other stuff to explore, right up on Dearborn, there's a place called the Fisher Building, not far from here. The Fisher Building is a great Daniel Burnham building from the 1880s. Gorgeous golden brown terracotta with Art Nouveau furnishings all over the outside. What's really cool, though, is it used to be offices, now it's apartments, but they kept the old frosted glass doors with the names of the businesses. So on the third floor, somebody is living in an apartment where the door says Teal Detective Agency on the outside. I mean, it's the coolest thing ever. Also, up on Wabash Street, there's a place called the Virgin Hotel near Wabash of the River. Go inside of that place, hit number 26 on the elevator to go to a rooftop bar that'll be like so close to the dome of the Jewelers Building, it's like you could reach out and touch it. And as nice as that place is, 100 years ago, on the same spot on Wabash, there was a Fleabag Hotel where Charlie Chaplin and his vaudeville troupe used to stay. Chaplin would go on to describe the Chicago of 1912 as beautiful in its ugliness, with a spirit of pioneer gaiety that enlivened the senses while beneath throbbed a sense of masculine loneliness. I love that description. If that's the kind of city you're looking for, we still have that here too. Like underneath Michigan Avenue, the old Billy Goat Tavern is still as gloriously grimy as it ever was. Even in the Gold Coast, if you turn a corner, you might find an old bar that looks like it hasn't changed a bit since the 1930s. Sometimes the guys on the bar stools look like they haven't moved a bit since the 1930s either. But really, everywhere you go, there are adventures to be had, there are mysteries to be solved. So everybody, thank you very much for riding along with me today. My name is Adam, and I'll go out and explore. But before you go out and explore, please remain in your seats for a second until the crew tells us